Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the latest version of Travel Mole's COVID-19 interviews. And one of the regions in the world that has probably done better than most, if not all, has been the Caribbean. And the hoteliers, I'm sure, have been working, and the tourism associations have been working extremely hard in order to maintain that record. And my guest today is Frank Comito from the CHTA. He is the top man. He's going to answer our questions. Good morning, Frank.
Morning. Hi. Thanks for having us.
No problem. Now, Frank, as far as the United Kingdom is concerned, many of the Caribbean islands, but not all, are now on the UK's Foreign and Commonwealth Office green list, which means we're good to go, and we would be able to go visit those countries. Whether those countries accept us without quarantine is an interesting situation. But as I understand it, most of that list that's on the FCO green list would accept UK visitors without quarantine at the moment. Is that correct?
That's correct, but most are also asking that there be some evidence, proof given that they've had a PCR test, basically a negative test within a time frame. The time frame varies by destination, but providing that assurance can be given. And in some destinations, they're actually doing the tests upon arrival as well. That's an option as well. And the length of time, the waiting time before a test is taken, before you travel, and so on, has varied as well. But for the most part, you can travel to the region. Those destinations that are open now, not all of them are open, and provide a proof of a negative test and get in without any kind of quarantine situation.
Well, that's the situation with the UK. The situation with the US visitors has been a little bit more fluid, as I understand it. Visitors have been coming into Jamaica since, or they start to come in this week, or they've been coming in for a little while. Is that also common amongst the Caribbean islands?
What part of that, Graham?
Pardon?
What part of that? What part of the question?
Well, are the Americans allowed to visit the Caribbean more freely, say, than the Brits have been?
No, I think the open policy relates to any jurisdiction at this point, and in some jurisdictions, I think Jamaica has put in place a situation where if you're coming from a couple of different types of states, you have to meet a different kind of criteria. But for the most part, it's fairly open, providing you can prove a negative.
It's obviously a very difficult situation for Caribbean hoteliers and the Caribbean tourism authorities, because both the UK and the USA are their major target markets overseas, right. I would think. And also, probably the worst two countries in the world in terms of handling COVID-19. But being such a tourism-dependent region, in order to live, you're going to have to let some of these people in.
Yeah, and it's just about doing it as smart a way as possible. We're not able, and I don't think anyone's able to guarantee that they're COVID-free or your travel would be without incident. But what we're trying to do is minimize the risk and significantly minimize that risk. And we've put in place, we've been working very hard on protocols, training, guidelines. We have trained in the past couple of weeks thousands of employees and managers and supervisors and owners of tourism-related enterprises and destination training with tourism officials, tourism boards, and so on. Because we take very seriously the peace of mind promise, if you will. That's what we want to. We want to provide that type of assurance as much as possible. You can't guarantee 100% today, but certainly I'm really impressed with the commitment by both the governments and the private sector. I have never seen it at this level that we've seen in our region in collaborating and working on protocols. We have a very unique partnership, almost 6 years now, with the Caribbean Public Health Agency and the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association and the Caribbean Tourism Organization, where we collaborate on health safety matters. And we're doing it right now on training. We did it on the development of very comprehensive guidelines by sector, and we're doing training by sector as well. So doing those kinds of things, we hope that we can mitigate the threat, provide not only confidence to consumers, but also confidence to our employees, because it's really important that our people feel that they're being protected as well. And slowly, in a very determined way, but also very calculated, careful way, open up our borders and allow people to come in. There's certainly a crying need for a sense of wellness by the traveling public, and there's no better place in the world to provide that sense of wellness than in the Caribbean. It's just a beautiful, natural, healing kind of environment.
Well, what percentage of your members would now be open for trade? And if I was to arrive in one of your members' hotels, I know there might be slight differences in protocol, but is there general things? I mean, are buffets gone? Does all the staff wear masks? What's the deal?
Yeah, I mean, what you're seeing is you've seen a revision of all of those kinds of protocols, and I would venture to say that just about every hotel in the Caribbean, if not every hotel that's opening or in the process of planning to open, has put in operational health safety protocols and things like food buffets. If they're providing them, it's no longer self-serve. It's with more protection in terms of glass or plexiglass or whatever, and you're seeing all of those protocols being put in place. It's a whole different environment, and what we're finding as well in the early stages is that the guests expect this, but they also are confident when they see it, rather than, I mean, you have a very, very small percentage that feel as though we're requiring you to wear a mask, except if you're lying by the pool or the beach or in an open area or dining outside. There's lots of outdoor dining in the Caribbean, as you know. But by and large, our guests are expecting this, and they feel assured when they're seeing it. These are early indications that we're getting based on destinations that started opening up a couple of weeks ago.
Good. Have your members all been paid from pre-COVID areas? I mean, I know at the beginning of the COVID crisis, there were lots of claims of some of your hoteliers who are still waiting for their invoices to be paid and stuff, both from UK and US tour operators.
Right. Most of the tour operators have honored their obligation, but we do still have several large ones that included in that who have not fulfilled their obligation for stays that were paid for by the public the first quarter of 2020. They had the cash in hand and have opted not to reimburse that cash. We find that really an unfortunate practice. We think the region has been incredibly loyal to tour operators, and that really should be looking out for them. This is the outstanding amounts are in the millions of dollars, and like I said, most tour operators have honored their obligation, but there are several, particularly large ones, that have not, and it's a cause of tremendous hardship, and it will probably result, if it hasn't already, in the closure of some of our hotels in the region. It's unconscionable.
And what steps are you doing in order to rectify that situation? Are you going to government level? Are you naming names in public? I mean, how are you going about that?
Well, we have mentioned, we've refrained from naming names, but we did mention it recently because there was one holdout that really had not started working with the industry in a more collaborative way. And since we've named them publicly, there has been some outreach, and they are working to try to come to a resolution. But one of the things I think that's really important is to change the policy, and we actually getting feedback from our members right now on their receptivity to a policy change whereby Caribbean hoteliers, as many as possible, we know it would be difficult to get everybody on board, but getting a significant number of hotels on board and hotel and tourism associations on board who basically adopt a policy that that payment has to be made prior to the fulfillment of the service, even up to 1 day or the day of arrival. That payment should be made in advance. The consumer's made that payment. The tour operators are holding on to that cash. It's only fair, and they have costs that they have to incur and cover in the process. It's only fair that before the visitor arrives, that the tour operator gets their share, but also the hotel gets their share.
And what's the reaction been so far from tour operators when you've confronted them with that situation?
Well, we hope that when we have some of their quality properties that they really generate a good amount of revenue on historically, that as a number of those properties, and we are seeing indications that some are going to sign on to this, that they will sit up and listen and know that this is a two-way street. It's not a one-way deal. That's what's been going on. It's been a one-way deal where the big boys are saying basically you play by our rules or we're not going to sell you. And that's unfair.
And do you think that, rather bizarrely or strangely, that the COVID-19 crisis has actually put the boot on the other foot, that you're actually in a stronger position as Caribbean hoteliers, being in a region that's suffered very little from COVID, that you're actually in a stronger position now than, say, you were 6 months ago?
Well, we hope so, but we're only as strong as we are united. And that's, I mean, as you know, the Caribbean is such a hodgepodge of opportunity, and we do unite on various issues. As you know, we were very successful on the environmental tax, if you call it, a few years ago, and that's because we work together, public, private sector, various destinations. And with any matter, I think that's the key thing. We're doing that right now, as in many ways, even though we have our own individual protocols and adaptations of health safety protocols and so on in different destinations. But we are doing it by and large as a region, recognizing that the brand Caribbean is out there, and the public certainly sees places like Jamaica and the Bahamas as independent brands and so on, but they also see the Caribbean as a brand. So it's important that we work together to protect that, to provide that assurance in the public's mind.
And do you think that this is the opportunity to once more, and perhaps successfully this time, as opposed to the many failures that have gone into the past, to promote this one Caribbean brand?
I would hope so. I mean, the rub on that has always been money. We've tried it a number of times, and we've had many campaigns that have been successful, and they've demonstrated the value of brand marketing, Caribbean brand marketing, and public relations. But that only works if enough destinations are involved in it. And that, getting back to that point I made earlier, while we work together on a number of matters, we haven't quite been able to figure out a formula that everybody's comfortable with, public and private sectors, comfortable with, to be able to put money into that pot, as they've done successfully in the United States. But it's a whole different matter because they have one federal kind of situation. And with that, the federal government basically, with the private sector, agrees to protocols for funding it through an apportionment of the U.S. passport fee, basically, that goes into helping to sustain that operation. You can't run it on, as we've tried in the past, with great frustration, but also great success. You can't run it on just volunteer contributions. It doesn't sustain itself.
Finally, Frank, have any of your hoteliers shed buckets of tears about the demise of Liat? Hello?
Yeah, I don't think it's unexpected. Unfortunately, while it's a challenge and the governments are wrestling to address that fairly quickly, the fortunate situation is we're in a place where we've got private sector carriers, regional carriers, that have really grown from strength to strength over the past years. Inter-Caribbean, Caribbean Airlines. I mean, these carriers have been able to expand their operations. I think Inter-Caribbean went from a handful of destinations that they served 12 years ago to right now, I believe they're approaching or somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 destinations that they service. So it certainly makes sense to look for formulas, and I believe the governments, led by Prime Minister Gonzalez, who's now the chairman of CARICOM out of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the governments are taking a serious look at how the private carriers might be engaged in delivering the kinds of services that are necessary for some of the other islands. And it makes sense to be able to subsidize that in some fashion, to be able to get it up to a level where it can sustain itself on its own. And there are indications that we may be moving in that direction, which would be terrific. The ones that I've mentioned have inter-carrier agreements, and they're able to connect with carriers out of Europe and so on. And if there are policies that further support that, you'll only see that kind of those kinds of agreements expand.
Good. Well, Frank, I wish you all the very best in getting your members up and running and getting back to the levels of business that they would really like. And I hope it's not too long before you and I can share a glass of beer together next to the sunny blue Caribbean.
That would be great. Caribbean Travel Marketplace. It might be virtual this year, but geez, would be great if we could do it in January. We're wrestling with that right now to figure out the best way forward. But thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you, Graham and Travel Mo, for continuing to shine the light on our incredible region.
Lovely. Thanks, Frank. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.